Life is full of unexpected twists. But some moments leave an indelible mark on our hearts and minds. Tonight, I'll share with you a story of trust, boundaries, and the fragile line between love and betrayal, a night that altered everything I thought I knew about family and relationships. It's a tale that's as emotional as it is thought-provoking. And I invite you to dive into it with an open heart. But before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It's your support that inspires me to bring you more compelling stories. And now, let's delve into this unforgettable experience together. Life has a way of throwing unexpected moments at us, often when we least anticipate them. That night was one of those moments for me. It started as an unusually quiet evening. The kind where time seems to stretch endlessly. My sister was in her room, and I was in mine, cocooned in the warm, familiar surroundings of my small space. A half-read book sat on my lap, its pages waiting patiently for me to return after far too long. The clock struck midnight, and an eerie stillness seemed to settle over the world. The sounds of the day had long faded, leaving only the faint rustle of the wind slipping through the slightly ajar window. It was one of those rare moments when silence doesn't just surround you, it presses in, wrapping itself around you like a heavy blanket. There was a strange comfort in that quiet, a kind of peace that made the ordinary feel extraordinary. But just as I began to relax, believing the night would pass uneventfully, a sudden, sharp knock shattered the stillness. The sound was startling, like a stone dropped into a serene pond, sending ripples through the calm. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I froze. The silence that followed the knock felt heavier, almost expectant. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was probably my sister needing something. With that thought, I stood up and headed toward the door. When I opened it, I was greeted by a sight that took me entirely by surprise. My brother-in-law, Joseph, stood there, swaying slightly. His usually composed demeanor was gone, replaced by a disoriented, almost vacant expression. The sharp, unmistakable scent of alcohol hit me like a wave, its potency making me instinctively take a small step back. The dim hallway light barely illuminated his face, but even in the shadows, I could see the strained, almost uncomfortable smile that stretched across his lips. His eyes, glassy and unfocused, met mine briefly before he muttered something that made my stomach drop. "Wife, I miss you so much," he slurred, his voice thick with the effects of too much alcohol. The words hung in the air, heavy and disjointed, refusing to make sense. For a moment, I was frozen, caught between confusion and disbelief. Before I could gather my thoughts, he stumbled forward, wrapping me in a clumsy, tight embrace. His arms felt like an unyielding cage, and the strength of his grip left me momentarily paralyzed. "I'm Victoria. I grew up in the countryside, where life was simple and predictable. Every day was filled with the sounds of birdsong, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the soft hum of my parents tending to their modest farm. My parents were hardworking, loving people who shielded me from life's harsher realities, ensuring my childhood was a haven of safety and warmth. But all of that changed when I turned 18. It was time to leave my idyllic home and move to the city for my education. The decision was a bittersweet one, a necessary step toward my future but also a departure from the only life I had ever known. I moved into my sister's apartment, a cozy little space she shared with Joseph, in the heart of the bustling city. City life was a world apart from the countryside. The endless sea of people. The towering skyscrapers. And the constant noise, it was overwhelming. The rhythm of life here was relentless. A far cry from the unhurried pace of my childhood. But amidst the chaos, I found solace in my sister and Joseph's warm welcome. They did everything they could to make me feel at home. Their kindness and generosity easing my transition. At first, life in the city seemed promising. Even exciting. I admired the seemingly unbreakable bond between my sister and Joseph. Their affection was a quiet reassurance. A reminder that love could thrive even amidst the hustle and bustle of city life. But as time went on, the dynamics of our lives began to shift subtly. Initially, their affection was understated. Almost reserved. As if they were mindful of my presence. But slowly, their moments of tenderness became more open. More visible. Sometimes, it was a lingering touch. A shared laugh. Or a whispered conversation that seemed to exist in its own world. Other times, it was more intimate, a quick kiss. An embrace. Or a stolen glance that spoke volumes. For me, these moments were a strange mix of admiration and discomfort. I often looked away, pretending not to notice, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Yet, I couldn't help but feel a pang of longing. A wistful yearning for something I had yet to experience. One weekend stands out vividly in my memory. It was a rare day off for both my sister and Joseph. They decided to spend it together, enjoying the simple pleasure of each other's company. The sight of them, laughing and relaxed in the living room, was a picture of contentment. Meanwhile, I had plans of my own, a study session with friends at the library. As I left the apartment, their laughter followed me. A reminder of the bond they shared. Little did I know, that weekend would mark the beginning of a series of events that would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and the complexities of human relationships. The study session passed quicker than I expected. And by late afternoon, I found myself heading back home. If you've made it this far into the video and feel moved by the story, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. As I stepped into the living room, I stopped in my tracks, completely frozen. My sister and her husband were seated on the couch. But the scene before me wasn't what I was accustomed to. They were wrapped in each other's arms. Their closeness unguarded and intimate. My brother-in-law's hand moved softly through her hair while my sister rested her head on his shoulder. Her expression radiating contentment. But what truly caught me off guard was the tender kiss they shared. A gesture so private it made me feel like I had accidentally stumbled into a moment I wasn't meant to witness. My cheeks flushed as I hesitated in the doorway, unsure of how to proceed. My mind raced. Should I leave quietly and pretend I hadn't seen anything? Or should I awkwardly announce my presence? Before I could decide, my footsteps gave me away. Both of them turned their heads, their eyes landing on me. My sister, always quick with her wit, smiled knowingly, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Oh, you're home, Victoria," she said with a playful tone, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. It felt as if she could read every ounce of my discomfort. "Joseph," my brother-in-law, followed with his warm, casual smile. The kind that could disarm almost anyone. "How was your study session? Did you enjoy it?" he asked. His tone light and friendly, as if nothing unusual had occurred. I nodded stiffly, my face burning with embarrassment, unable to meet their eyes directly. "It was fine. I mumbled, my voice barely audible. Inside, however, I felt a storm brewing, a mixture of confusion, unease, and a tinge of something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was the unsettling realization that the boundaries of what I considered normal were shifting. The calm city life I had cherished now seemed like a puzzle where the pieces were subtly rearranging themselves. Despite the awkwardness, I couldn't deny a faint warmth as I listened to my sister's voice filling the room. Her laughter soft and familiar. The house had always been a haven of routine and comfort, and I'd grown attached to its peaceful rhythm. But tonight, something about that rhythm felt off. Dinner preparation was a shared effort. As usual, my sister, ever meticulous, ensured that everything was perfect, even if it was just the two of us eating together. As we set the table, the air was filled with the aroma of home-cooked food and the sound of our quiet conversations. We laughed over small anecdotes from our day, sharing a simplicity that made those moments feel special. Yet, beneath the surface, I couldn't shake an underlying tension. As my sister spoke about Joseph's work, her words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She mentioned how late he'd been staying at the office, how demanding his schedule had become. And though her tone remained light, there was an unspoken concern lingering in the air. It felt like the prelude to something significant, something I wasn't sure I wanted to confront. Later, as I settled into the living room with a book, I found it impossible to focus. My thoughts kept wandering back to Joseph. He had always been kind, a constant in our family dynamics. But recently, I had started noticing subtle changes in his behavior. The way his gaze lingered a fraction too long. The way his smile seemed to carry a weight I couldn't decipher. It unsettled me. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks. But the feeling lingered. The sound of the front door creaking open snapped me out of my thoughts. My sister, who had been humming softly as she tidied up, stopped and glanced toward the hallway. We both knew who it was before his footsteps even reached us. Joseph entered the room, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something different. He looked tired, disheveled even, and his movements lacked their usual assuredness. "Hey, you two still awake?" he asked, his voice low and slightly strained. There was a rasp to it, as if he had spent the day talking endlessly. My sister greeted him with her characteristic smile, but I noticed the faintest flicker of worry in her eyes. She had always been attuned to his moods. Yet tonight, she chose not to press him. "Just finishing up here." "How was work?" she asked lightly, her tone gentle. Joseph's gaze shifted briefly to me, his eyes lingering just a moment too long. I couldn't ignore the faint scent of alcohol that accompanied him, nor the dilation of his pupils. It wasn't the first time I'd seen him drink. But tonight, it felt different, almost like an invisible line had been crossed. As the night deepened, an unspoken tension seemed to settle over the house. It was subtle but unmistakable, like the faint vibration of a string pulled too tight. And though none of us addressed it openly, I knew this was only the beginning of a story I hadn't yet fully grasped. There was something unsettling about the way Joseph was acting, or perhaps it was the way his eyes lingered on me, as if he were trying to communicate something unspeakable. A message wrapped in silence. His presence felt heavy, weighted with an invisible tension that clung to the air like a storm cloud on the verge of breaking. My sister, ever the epitome of patience and grace, rose from her seat to greet him. Her smile was warm yet weary, her voice a gentle balm against the strange atmosphere. "I'm glad you're home," she said softly, brushing her hand along his arm as she leaned in to place a familiar kiss on his cheek. The gesture, so simple and loving, should have felt natural. But to me, it seemed oddly misplaced amidst the unspoken unease that filled the room like an uninvited guest. As the evening unfolded, that nagging discomfort grew harder to ignore. Joseph's laughter rang out too loudly, a brittle echo that felt more like a performance than genuine joy. His words came out uneven, the slur of someone who had indulged too much. And yet it wasn't just the alcohol. Something deeper lay beneath his facade, a restlessness that seeped into his every movement. And then there were the glances. Those strange, fleeting looks he cast my way. His eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite name but which made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. But the growing pit in my stomach told a different story. The hours dragged on, each minute feeling stretched thin under the weight of my unease. Sensing the tension, my sister tried valiantly to steer the conversation toward lighter topics. Her voice cheerful but strained. Yet, no matter how hard she tried, the energy in the room remained taut, as if we were all tiptoeing around something we dared not name. For the first time, I felt like more than just an observer in their relationship. I was a participant in a dynamic I neither understood nor welcomed. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind like a broken record. I told myself over and over that I was overreacting. Maybe Joseph was just tired. Or maybe the alcohol had blurred the edges of his usual demeanor. Yet the unease I felt wasn't so easily dismissed. It wasn't just the way he looked at me or the forced tone of his laughter, it was the way the entire evening felt like a carefully constructed illusion. One that had begun to crack under its own weight. For the first time, I questioned my decision to stay with my sister and her husband. They were my family, my safe haven. Yet tonight, everything about this home felt foreign. The familiarity I had once taken for granted was now shadowed by a sense of alienation. As if I had unwittingly stepped into a story I didn't belong in. Staring at the ceiling, I tried to push these thoughts away, telling myself that tomorrow would bring clarity. But sleep refused to come, leaving me trapped in a whirlwind of confusion and dread. When the nightmare began, it felt almost unreal. My brother-in-law's grip on me was tight and suffocating. His words a garbled mess of drunken incoherence. "Joseph. Stop. Please. It's me. Victoria." I pleaded, my voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. His actions were disjointed, erratic, as if his mind was caught in a fog that refused to lift. The air around me seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, pressing against my chest until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the alcohol, this was something darker. Something that shattered every assumption I had held about the man I thought I knew. His breath was warm and sticky against my skin. His hands unsteady as they clung to me in a way that felt both desperate and terrifyingly deliberate. I struggled against him, my body moving on instinct, every muscle straining to escape his grasp. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. The world around me faded, leaving only the cold reality of his actions and the visceral fear coursing through my veins. This wasn't the Joseph I had known. This was someone else entirely, someone who had crossed a boundary so sacred that even thinking about it felt like a betrayal of the life we had all shared. With every ounce of strength I had, I pushed him away, my voice trembling as I cried out, "This is wrong. Joseph. Please. I'm not your wife." For a moment, his glazed eyes seemed to flicker with recognition. the drunken haze in his expression faltering. But just as quickly, he took a step forward. As if caught between two realities, one where he was my brother-in-law and another where he had become something unrecognizable. Finally, with a desperate shove, I managed to create enough distance to breathe. My chest heaved with sharp, panicked gasps, tears burning in my eyes as the enormity of what had just happened crashed over me. Joseph stood there, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his gaze clouded with a mix of confusion and shame. "Victoria," he muttered, the word barely audible, as if he were grappling with the enormity of his own actions. The silence that followed was suffocating. I backed away, my body trembling, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. This man, who had once been a part of my family, was now a stranger. And I knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same again. "Go back to your room, Joseph. Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling as the weight of the moment bore down on me. "We need to talk about this. But not now. You're not yourself." The words felt fragile, inadequate. Yet they were all I could manage. For a moment, Joseph stood frozen, blinking rapidly as if trying to piece together fragments of reality. His face was a portrait of disorientation, his breath shallow and uneven. He opened his mouth as if to say something but thought better of it. Instead, he turned slowly and stumbled toward the hallway, his steps unsteady, almost ghost-like. I watched him retreat, my chest tightening with a mixture of dread and helplessness. The door clicked shut behind him, and silence filled the space like a thick fog. I remained rooted in place, every muscle in my body stiff as if turned to stone. My mind spiraled, replaying the nightmare that had unfolded mere moments ago. What had I just witnessed? How could Joseph, my brother-in-law, someone I had once admired and trusted, act in such a way? My thoughts collided in a cacophony of disbelief, confusion, and a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. Eventually, my knees gave way, and I sank to the floor, my back pressing against the cool surface of the door. It felt like the only solid thing grounding me in this whirlwind of emotions. My hands trembled as they clutched at my chest, trying to calm the storm inside. Tears, hot and relentless, spilled over, blurring my vision. They weren't just tears of sadness or anger, they carried the weight of fear, confusion, and a profound sense of loss. I couldn't continue like this, pretending everything was fine when the foundations of my life had been irreparably shaken. Yet, I didn't know where to begin or how to fix the mess that had just unraveled. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Still, for now, I could do nothing but sit in the suffocating silence of the room, my breath hitching as I tried to make sense of it all. The sound of footsteps broke through my haze, sharp and purposeful. I looked up to see my sister standing in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her expression a mix of frustration and concern. Her eyes locked onto mine, searching, probing. I hastily wiped my face, forcing a shaky smile in an attempt to appear composed. "Hey, what's up?" I asked, my voice thin and unconvincing. Her brow furrowed as she leaned slightly forward. "Where's John? I've been calling for him. He didn't come to bed last night. Was he with you?" The question hit me like a blow to the stomach. My heart pounded as vivid flashes of the night before surged forward, John's slurred words. His drunken stupor. The chaos that followed. My pulse quickened. And panic gripped me. I couldn't let her find out. She wouldn't understand. She couldn't. My voice faltered as I struggled to compose myself. I don't know. Maybe he went to the living room to sleep. He wasn't feeling well. Her eyes narrowed. Her gaze sharp and probing. She wasn't convinced. I could feel her suspicion hanging heavy in the air. My chest tightened under the weight of the lie. But I knew I couldn't tell her the truth. Not now. Maybe not ever. She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. I don't know what's going on with him lately, she muttered. Her voice tinged with frustration and exhaustion. He's been drinking so much. And I just can't get through to him. I thought he was finally turning a corner. But now, I don't know anymore. It's exhausting. My heart ached for her. She deserved so much better than this chaos. This pain. Yet, I couldn't share the full extent of what had happened. The guilt was suffocating. Like a heavy stone pressing down on my chest. I'm sure he's fine. I said. My tone deliberately soft. Even as my insides churned. He probably just had too much to drink. Let me go check on him. She nodded. Her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own worries. And turned to walk down the hall. I exhaled slowly. Relief washing over me. But it was fleeting. My stomach churned with unease as I opened my bedroom door. Knowing what, or rather, who, awaited me. John was still there. Crouched beneath the bed frame like a shadow that refused to leave. His eyes met mine. Wide and unfocused. A mix of confusion and shame clouding his expression. What happened? He mumbled. His voice thick and groggy. I don't remember much. I crouched down. Keeping my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. You were drunk. John. Do you really not remember anything from last night? His face flushed. His hands fidgeting nervously. No. I didn't mean. I raised a hand to stop him. It doesn't matter right now. You need to leave before my sister comes in. She's already suspicious. He nodded quickly. Scrambling out from under the bed with awkward, jerky movements. I'm sorry, he whispered. His voice barely audible. I don't know what happened. I was confused. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that could undo the damage. Nothing that could make this right. I watched as he slipped out of the room, leaving behind an air of tension so thick it felt suffocating. I sat there for a moment, my head in my hands, trying to steady my breathing. The storm of emotions inside me, guilt, fear, anger, swirled relentlessly, threatening to consume me. Tears welled up once more. But I wiped them away with a sharp inhale. I couldn't afford to break down. Not yet. Not while my sister still needed me to hold everything together. For now, I would bury the truth. But I knew the weight of it wouldn't stay hidden forever. I walked back into the living room, where my sister sat curled on the couch. Her shoulders slightly less tense but still carrying the unmistakable shadow of concern in her eyes. She glanced up at me. Her voice soft. Almost hesitant. Is he okay? I forced a nod. My words coming out as steady as I could manage. Yeah. He's just sleeping it off, the alcohol hit him hard last night. He'll be fine. Her gaze lingered, studying my face for a moment that felt far too long. She nodded slowly. But I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She didn't press further. But I knew the question hung in the air between us. Unspoken yet heavy. And why wouldn't it? I was lying straight to her face. A half-truth veiled in reassurances I could barely convince myself to believe. The silence in the house wrapped around me as I sank onto the couch beside her. The weight of the previous night pressed down on my chest like a stone. Impossible to ignore. Everything felt fragile. Like one wrong word or one poorly concealed expression would cause it all to shatter. I glanced at my sister out of the corner of my eye. She had turned her attention back to the TV. But the tension in her jaw betrayed the storm of thoughts running through her mind. I wanted to tell her everything. To confide in her like we used to when we were kids. But I couldn't. Not now. Not ever. Perhaps. The truth was too heavy. Too tangled in guilt and fear. The decision to leave came slowly. Creeping in like a shadow I couldn't shake. It wasn't made lightly, it was born out of sleepless nights spent wrestling with my own thoughts. The unrelenting guilt that gnawed at me. And the suffocating tension that had taken over the house. Staying meant pretending. Keeping up the fragile facade that everything was fine when, in truth, everything had unraveled. The day I decided to leave, the house felt stifling. Its walls closing in as if it knew what I was about to do. My sister was in the kitchen, humming softly as she made breakfast. The smell of coffee filled the air. A scent so familiar it nearly broke me. John had already left for work. And the timing felt both cruel and perfect. As I stepped into the kitchen, she looked up. Her face lighting up with a smile. "Morning. Breakfast is almost ready," she said, setting a plate on the counter. I hesitated. The words I needed to say catching in my throat. I can't stay for breakfast. I have to go out and take care of some things, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "Are you okay? You've been acting a little off lately." "I'm fine," I replied too quickly, my voice trembling ever so slightly. I could see her studying me, her worry deepening. I hated that I was the cause of that worry. But what could I say? The truth would break her. And I wasn't strong enough to face the fallout. She didn't press further, though. Instead, she nodded, her voice soft as she said, "If you need anything, you know I'm here. Right?" I nodded, swallowing hard as I turned to leave the kitchen. At the doorway, I paused, the weight of the moment threatening to crush me. "I love you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, raw with emotion I couldn't hide. She looked up, her eyes softening as she smiled at me. "I love you too," she replied simply, her words filled with warmth and trust that I felt I didn't deserve. I left the kitchen, retreating to my room to pack the few belongings I could carry. The act of packing felt surreal, like I was dismantling a part of my life piece by piece. As I zipped up the bag, a pang of guilt stabbed through me. Leaving felt cowardly, like running away from a storm instead of weathering it. But staying would have suffocated me. Walking out of the house was harder than I'd imagined. Each step felt like a betrayal, not just to my sister but to the version of myself I had been before everything fell apart. The front door closed behind me with a quiet click. And I stood on the porch, the weight of my decision settling heavily on my shoulders. As I walked away, the relief of leaving was tainted with sorrow so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. I wasn't just leaving a house, I was leaving behind a life. A family. and a version of myself that I might never reclaim. But I couldn't stay. The secret I carried was too heavy. The guilt too suffocating. I told myself that this was the first step towards something better. Something lighter. Yet, as I stepped into the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking away from more than I realized: love, forgiveness, and perhaps even redemption. Still, I had to keep moving forward. I didn't know where I was going or what the future held. But staying wasn't an option. I clung to the hope that someday I'd find a way to heal. Maybe then I could face my sister again. Maybe then I could make things right. Until that day came, all I could do was take one step at a time, away from the weight of the past and toward the possibility of peace. She hesitated. Her concern etched deeply into her features, every line of her face betraying the silent storm within. Her lips parted slightly, as though she were on the verge of saying something to dissuade me. But she stopped herself. After a long pause, one that stretched unbearably between us, she finally nodded. "If that's what you think is best, I respect your decision," she said, her voice soft but tinged with reluctance. "But promise me, if things get difficult, if it ever becomes too much, you'll let me know. Don't shut me out." I managed a weak nod, offering a smile so fragile it felt like it would shatter under the weight of her gaze. Inside, though, my heart churned with emotions I couldn't voice. How could I tell her the truth? That my decision to leave wasn't fueled by a desire for independence but by an unbearable need to escape, the suffocating burden of guilt that had anchored itself to my soul. It wasn't freedom I sought but a reprieve. A desperate attempt to distance myself from the shadows of my past. The day of my departure arrived too soon. And with it came an overwhelming mix of dread and inevitability. Joseph stood silently in the corner of the room, his presence heavy with unspoken words. His eyes followed me, filled with a pain and confusion that pierced through the air between us. I couldn't meet his gaze for long. I didn't have the courage. Instead, I busied myself with my suitcase, focusing on the mechanical act of packing. As if folding clothes and zipping up bags could somehow tidy up the mess I was leaving behind. When the door closed behind me, the sound was deafening. It marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. I felt a strange cocktail of emotions: loss, relief, and a nagging sense of doubt. It was as though I had left a part of myself behind in that house. Pieces of my soul tucked away in the corners of every room. The memories clung to the air like a haunting echo, refusing to let go. Yet, a part of me clung to the hope that by leaving, I could start over. That maybe, just maybe, this was the only way to find peace. Life in the small room I moved to was starkly different. The bare walls, the faint hum of city noise filtering through the thin windows, and the solitude, it all felt foreign. While the quiet offered a strange kind of solace, it also gave my mind too much freedom to wander. Memories I had tried to bury resurfaced, especially in the stillness of the night. The guilt was relentless, whispering to me in the silence, reminding me of truths I could never share. I often questioned my decision, wrestling with the thought of whether silence was truly the right path. Deep down, I knew that revealing the truth would unravel everything. Some secrets, once spoken, could not only hurt me but destroy the fragile ties that bound us together. And I wasn't ready to inflict that kind of pain, not on my sister. Joseph and I drifted apart as the weeks turned into months. Our once frequent conversations dwindled to sporadic exchanges, each interaction laden with an unspoken agreement to keep things surface level. It was better this way, distance was necessary, even if it hurt. My sister, however, remained a constant presence. She called regularly, her voice a lifeline that tethered me to the past. Her words were filled with warmth and care. But with each call, the pang of guilt grew sharper. She trusted me, loved me unconditionally, and I felt like a fraud for keeping the truth from her. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But I found that it only dulled the edges of my pain. The guilt lingered, though its sharpness gradually softened. I threw myself into my work and studies, channeling my energy into building a life I could be proud of, a life where the mistakes of the past wouldn't define me. Slowly, I began to learn the art of self-forgiveness. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, but about recognizing that carrying the weight of guilt indefinitely would only crush me. Reflecting on everything, I came to accept a profound truth: mistakes are an inevitable part of life. But what defines us is how we respond to them. The choices I made in moments of vulnerability had rippled through my relationships, leaving fractures that couldn't easily be mended. It was a harsh lesson in accountability, in understanding the impact of our actions not just on ourselves but on those we love. As this story comes to an end, it leaves us with a profound lesson about the delicate nature of trust, the weight of our decisions, and the resilience needed to move forward after life-altering moments. Mistakes, no matter how painful, can serve as opportunities for growth, teaching us to cherish the relationships we have and to navigate life with greater wisdom and clarity. Let this be a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a chance to rebuild and find peace. Learn to forgive, not just others, but also yourself, and never let fleeting emotions or missteps cloud your judgment. Life's challenges aren't roadblocks but stepping stones to becoming stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What lessons did you take away? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire, move, and connect us all. Until next time, take care and see you in the next video.